Parliament, it's pretty obvious that today's event is going to address one of the biggest and most critical topics on our agenda this year, and probably for longer, namely the future of the EU's long-term budget, the Multiannual Financial Framework, the MFF. We all know that the EU budget is not just a financial tool, it's a reflection of our shared priorities and shared ambitions. And it provides the framework in which we as European Union respond to the challenges we face. And I think I don't need to tell anyone here, the list of challenges to be addressed is rather long. The European Union needs to find the means for making strategic investments. It also needs to repay debt. We need to boost competitiveness, we need to address climate, we need to address digital transition, and we have many, many other societal challenges in terms of demography, territorial development, and so on. And we have to address all of these things in a very difficult, I would say, malign external environment. Really nothing compared to how things were 7 years ago, 14 years ago, or so on. And that means, of course, among other things, that one area of spending that we have to look at in the next MFF, and probably has to take a big leap, is security and defence. Now, the European Parliament, as I'm sure you know, we have adopted our own initiative report in May on these themes. The title of the resolution reflected some of these things. It referred to the EU in a changing world, and we know that the world is changing very, very fast. So this afternoon's event, we want to look at two quite closely linked questions. Firstly, the spending priorities for the European Union going forward, and secondly, the revenue options that can finance our ambitions and help us to meet the challenges ahead. I'm really happy to introduce our panel for this discussion today. First and foremost, we have the two co-rapporteurs, so our two MEPs, Carla Tavares and Siegfried Mureșan, members of Parliament, co-rapporteurs of our report on the MFF, and they will be able, of course, to tell us the viewpoint from Parliament. I also welcome Eulalia Rubio, who's Senior Research Fellow at the Jacques Delors Institute in Paris, and she's also an expert, as I'm sure you know, in European economic governance, and has written extensively on this topic. I'm going to hand over to my colleague Tim Peters, Head of the Budgetary Policies Unit in EPRS. Thanks, Tim, and to you and your team for organising today's event. You're going to moderate, and I hope we will have a very rich discussion and that the questions and answers will be equally interesting and rich. So thank you once again, and over to you, Tim.
Thank you, Sarah, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm Tim Peters. I'm the head of unit for the Budgetary Policies Unit in the European Parliament's Research Service, and I'll be moderating today's panel. And we are here to explore some of the key questions of the debate. What should we finance as EU in the next long-term budget? How do we finance the budget, and how do we structure everything? And to help unpack these issues, I'm delighted to be joined by three excellent speakers who have direct involvement and have deep expertise in these issues. And I'm happy also to see so many participants here in the room, and also some budget experts in the room. I hope you also will ask good questions later. And I'll also like to greet all the participants online. I see we have 82 also participants online. Also welcome to you. And we'll start with a short statement by the panelists, not more than 8 minutes. I'll keep the watch. And subsequently, I'll ask a few questions, and then I'll open the floor also to all the participants here in the room. We have two languages today, English and Portuguese, even though I heard that Carla will also speak English, at least in the opening statement. But if anybody or you also want to use Portuguese later, that's possible. And you just have to put your headphones on, those colleagues in the room, or switch in the application for those following online. And we will start with Carla Tavares, a member of the Parliament, of the European Parliament from Portugal and representing the S&D Group. And last month you wrote on Instagram, the next MFF must promote a stronger social Europe, reinforcing the European pillar of social rights and modernizing and decentralizing cohesion policy for a more sustainable, competitive and fair economy and society. Could you elaborate on what that means concretely for the next MFF and how the next MFF should look like according to your wishes?
Good afternoon, and first, thank you for this invitation in this moment when we are waiting for the proposal from the Commission. The Parliament did your work and approved in the plenary in May the proposal from the Parliament about the Winnie report. And so, thank you all for being here today to discuss with us what is a big challenge of this term, the next multi-annual financial framework. And of course, I'm very happy to share this moment with my colleague Siegfried Mureșan. The next MFF will be a defining moment for the Union and a defining moment for the Union's strategic direction. Today, we face intertwined climate, social and geopolitical challenges. Large-scale warfare was returned to our neighborhood. We confront difficult economic and social conditions, a competitiveness gap persists, and the climate and biodiversity crisis worsens. Our spending must target European public goods that offer clear added value behind national budgets. So, having better synergies and coordination between Union and Member States spending are essential for all the European Union in this moment. One thing is clear for the European Parliament. Without significantly increased and better target public investment, the EU risks falling behind in global competitiveness and not living up to citizens' expectations. We face a rapidly evolving world where citizens have higher expectations of the Union and its budget. So, our next multi-annual financial framework needs greater resource than current 21-27 period. We must abandon the restrictive 1% of GNI. We cannot do more with the same budget. We want the next MFF to continue to support economic, social and territorial cohesion in order to help bind the Union together. These policies united our Union, strengthen the single market, encourage convergence and combat inequality, poverty and social exclusion. The Commission's vision of one national plan per member state, modelled on the Recovery and Resilience Facility, is unsustainable as the foundation for shared management spending after 2027. Any new design must preserve Parliament's legislative, budgetary and discharge authority rules. Regional and local authorities, along with stakeholders, must be closely involved from design to implementation since the beginning. We must close our competitiveness gap. Competitiveness is also about economic, social and territorial cohesion, not only about economic growth or increased productivity. The Union must develop a competitiveness framework in line with its own values. Competitiveness must foster social rights and environmental sustainability, as underlined in both the Draghi and Letta reports. We can see the positive side of this need for change as well. And the positive side is that we have now a unique window of opportunity to align European resources with its priorities. What can we do better? We can simplify to assess the EU funds for final beneficiaries. We must eliminate overlapping programme objectives, conflicting eligibility criteria and inconsistent horizontal rules. Yet simplification cannot grant the Commission excessive discretion without proper oversight. The institutional balance established by the treaties must be maintained. We can make the long-term budget more flexible, built-in crisis response mechanisms and adequate margins under all headings are essential. While maintaining investments predictability, that is essential for the member states to program their own expenses and for beneficiaries to know what they can count on. Programs need flexibility reserves. The budgetary authority should decide the specific allocations based on agreed political priorities. We must progress on new own resources. The Union's increased spending requirements demand genuine new own resources beyond current agreements. We call on the Council to adopt new own resources as a matter of urgency in order to enable sustainable repayment of the next generation EU borrowing, while underlining that new genuine own resources beyond the current IIA are essential for the Union's either spending needs. We also make it clear that new joint borrowing presents a viable option to ensure that the Union was sufficient resource to respond to acute Union-wide crises, such as the ongoing crisis in the area of security and defence, like a priority. Lastly, on my side, the report recalls that Union budget should be implemented in line with certain principles that are the financial regulation, therefore without doing significant harm to specific objectives, respecting applicable working and employment conditions and taking into account the principle of gender equality. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Carla. Next, we turn to Siegfried, a member of the European Parliament from Romania and representing the EPP group. And you've been very busy with elections in Romania recently and getting a new government in place in the country. And tomorrow you'll join the EPP summit taking place ahead of the European Council. And today you are here on our podium, and we are very happy that you share the point of view of the EPP here. And last week you wrote on X, Europe needs a long-term budget that delivers in times of crisis and builds long-term strengths. We, the EPP group, call for rejection of national plans without European dimension, stronger role for local and regional authorities, a moderate limited increase above 1% GNI, dedicated envelope for agriculture and cohesion, and full accountability and transparency. Do you think we will see all these demands reflected in the proposal that the Commission will put on the table on the 16th of July?
So, obrigado and boa tarde to our Portuguese interpreters, right, and Portuguese colleagues. Thankfully, Tim Peters is looking into Carla's Instagram account and my X account. Who knows what he would find if he would look onto my Instagram account. But really, thank you very much for inviting us, for organizing this debate. And for all the work which the EPRS is doing on the budget, which is really of essence. They also provide, Tim, you and your colleagues, a lot of support to us, a lot of guidance in this long and difficult process, because let's be honest, and Carla said it as well, the long-term budget of the Union, the Multiannual Financial Framework for the next 7 years will be one of the major files that EU institutions will have to agree on in these 5 years. And to give consent to a multi-annual budget, as per the rules, one needs the absolute majority of all members of the Parliament. This is why we, as pro-Europeans here, particularly Carla and myself as co-rapporteurs, we are obliged to cooperate. We're obliged to work together to ensure a strong position of the Parliament so that we can be successful in negotiations with the Council and Commission, but to also secure an absolute majority here in the Parliament. So if you look on Carla's and mine Instagram account, you might find from time to time the same thing posted there, because you will see us together, and you will see us together defending the position of the Parliament. So look, where are we? We are, as a Parliament, the first European institution that has set up and established and presented its priorities before the European Commission is supposed to present the draft plan and before the 27 heads of state and government might take again too long to agree on a common position of the Council and on a common line of the Council. We have managed to agree on some priorities now, and we say, look, the budget is one of the main tools that the Union has to implement its policies, and our money has to be where our priorities are, where the citizens' expectations are, and we feel right now that is security. On the one side, of course, meaning defense, cyber security, the concept is broad. And competitiveness, the strength of our economy on the other side. And these two, of course, are also interlinked, because we can only invest more in security defense if our economy is strong and can support this, but we can only attract investors if they feel safe in Europe. So we say, look, security and competitiveness are new priorities of the budget, but don't forget the long-standing priorities which have proven their viability, their importance over many years in time, that being agriculture and the Union's main investment policy, which is cohesion policy. These, of course, agriculture means many millions of jobs in agriculture. It means rural development. It means the high-quality food that is being produced in Europe. And cohesion means reducing the discrepancies between regions in Europe for the benefit of everyone, by the way, in the single market. These two priorities have proven their viability in time. Particularly cohesion has evolved in recent years. It does more digital projects now, more energy efficiency, more greening as well, which is the process, the evolvement is good, and of course it has to continue. So we say defend the traditional priorities, but of course these two traditional priorities have to evolve as well, be aligned with the new priorities of the Union. So we have to make sure that cohesion funds contribute better to the improvement of our competitiveness. In some areas, they can contribute also to more security through dual-use projects. One thing is certain, on security and defense, from the EU budget, we will have to allocate more money. In the previous 7 years, we had a specially dedicated chapter, a so-called heading, 1.2% of the budget, less than 15 billion euros for 7 years for 27 member states. Not enough. Here we will have to increase significantly. Increasing in one area doesn't mean that, Santa Claus is coming. We can increase in every area. Much as we would wish for that to happen, not possible, because the budget is partly funded by EU member states. They overspent at national level. Their space of maneuver is limited. Many of them are in excessive deficit procedures. So this is why we say, if you want Europe to do more, you have to fund it properly. You can't expect Europe to do more with less. So if you want Europe to do more in security, defense, and so on, overall, the budget most likely will need to increase, but the increase will have to be realistic, limited, very well argued, and there will have to be a European added value in it. We will have to convince also the member states who pay into the EU budget that we can do some things with the EU budget that they cannot do by themselves, including in the area of security and defense, which is the one area for which they are more likely to pay in more into the budget. So doing big European defense projects, a common European air shield, for example, which no member state alone can do. But for sure, we should learn a bit from the mistakes of others. We shouldn't repeat the mistakes of David Cameron, who said, at the time UK Prime Minister, the EU budget should be less than 1% of the Union's GNI, and we know how that ended up. The budget of the Union is not your enemy, it's important support, and this is why our position is not to ask for a minimum budget now, not to ask for a maximum, so to say less than, but we want a very realistic, needs-based approach, not an ideological one. So if we ask for an increase or so on, for this to be very well grounded. Of course, for competitiveness, cutting red tape, supporting SMEs, also the social and territorial cohesion is very important. Supporting research, innovation, digital technologies. But of course, the budget of the Union, a bit more than 1% of GNI, let's see exactly how much, cannot solve all of the problems. This is why we say that it should also be used for loans, for guarantees, for private investments. I don't believe that every problem around us can be solved by spending more of people's money. I believe that, we should also see how the budget can be used in a way in which it triggers more private investment, because, we can do much more with private money than we can do with our money alone. Carla was speaking, and I fully agree on the importance of the so-called own resources. Look, we want the budget to be funded in a transparent, predictable, European manner. We don't like the fact that every 7 years heads of state and government need to lock themselves up for 4 days and 4 nights, as happened in July 2020, to agree on their contributions on the size of the budget. We don't like this, not only because we care about their well-being and health, but also because we don't want the size of the budget to be determined by 27 national agendas, where each prime minister wants to contribute into the budget as little as possible and benefit as much as possible. We believe that own resources, so the EU having its own sources of revenues, means that the budget is transparent, it is predictable, it is European, and it also offers less space for, misinterpretations, mistrust. Now, obviously, it's easier for 2 members of the European Parliament to say the Union should have its own sources of revenue than it is for a Prime Minister or a Minister of Finance, who would always prefer to tax themselves and to decide themselves politically when and how much they pay into the EU budget. But we believe own resources now are not only, something nice to have, but they become imminent, and I'm coming to an end with this. They become imminent because at the beginning of the COVID pandemic, we launched the biggest package of economic support, Next Generation EU, the Recovery and Resilience Facility, providing support to regions, people, enterprises, countries affected by the pandemic, by the economic, social consequences. Whenever the Union makes money available, right, we announce this proudly, but we don't tell people in the first instance that, look, half of it was loans, half of it was grants, and this also needs to be paid back. So what I want to say is the repayment of Next Generation EU, of this new fund, is not yet fully clarified. The loans which we made available, member states are paying by themselves, and that's okay. But for the grants, member states say, look, for me it was a grant, money for free, I'm not paying it back. So there are basically 3 alternatives to repay that. Either member states pay more into the EU budget, and we don't see that happening, their will is not there, or you reduce the EU budget to pay back for the debt that you made. But the repayment of Next Generation EU will necessitate 25 billion euros per year as of 2028. That's 15% of the EU budget, a lot. So either 15% less Erasmus scholarships, 15% less for farmers, researchers, and so on, which we think is wrong. We don't want that to happen, or we introduce own resources. And this is why we believe that the introduction of own resources is so much needed right now. We defend it as a parliament to make sure that the funding is predictable long term. Needless to say, whoever wants European values whoever wants European funds needs to respect European values. Viktor Orban and everyone else, right? So this is why we're going to continue advocating for a very strong rule of law conditionality. So whoever breaches European values should know in advance, in a more objective, more predictable, known ex ante way, what the financial consequences for them will be. I'll stop here. Happy to take all of the questions and maybe 1 or 2 more thoughts later during the day. Thank you.
Thank you, Siegfried. Now we come to Eulalia. You work for the Jacques Delors Institute in Paris, and you're one of the eminent researchers on the EU budget. It's a very special topic. I think it's a small circle of experts and of members of parliament who deal with it and know a lot about it, but a lot of the world around us doesn't know so much about it. But now the MFF debate is coming up. More people are interested in this subject and want to know where the money is spent and the political priorities. You publish regularly also on the budget. One paper you published recently argued for a more permanent and flexible fiscal architecture for defense and climate resilience. Could you maybe elaborate on that and what we should look at when the first draft proposal of the Commission on the next MFF will be adopted on the 16th of July? What are the points we should particularly watch?
Thank you, Tim, and thanks for the invitation. Look, it's a bit awkward situation, mine, because I'm the only one that is not a deputy here, an expert. And I don't have insider, sorry for that, I don't have insider information about what will be on the table mid-July. So it's difficult to say what the Commission will propose. So what I wanted to share maybe in some minutes is what is my personal reading guide for the next MFF proposal. What I will try to, once the proposal will be on the table, what I will look at it more or less, which are the open questions. I think it's interesting to see where the thing will fall, let's say. Of course, looking at what we look in the past MFF proposals a bit, learning about the past. So the first question is the overall size. The classic benchmark we use is this in the last MFF proposals is, well, we compare always the size of the previous MFF with the size of the new MFF. Today's MFF, if we look at after the midterm review, it's at 1.02% of commitments. But if we add up Next Generation EU, of course, we are roughly at 2%. So the question is where we will fall. For me, the minimum would be, of course, to have this 1.02%. And I personally expect that the Commission will be brave and propose something more because we are in front of massive investment needs. And also because the Commission has always played by merging funds, actually, and presenting as a MFF package with the two things. So there is a sort of legitimacy to say, it's not 1% the MFF, it's 2% the package. So if you want to propose something, we will not say that it's less, but we cannot accept something less than the 1%. It is realistic, it is not realistic. Well, on the positive side, we see some frugals expressing openly that they want to go beyond 1%. I'm thinking about the Danish, for instance. On the negative side, we see other big frugals, especially the Germans, saying, no, they want a 1% MFF. So let's see what happens. The other question on the overall side, of course, is the question of how to deal with these NGO payments. There is a procedural question where they will be introduced in the MFF. For me, the most normal thing would be to put them outside the MFF ceilings because it's something different. It's not really investment. And also because it singles out the cost of debt and do not denaturalize the MFF. It's something that is a bit different. The other question is to which extent this will affect the overall size. And if I was the Commission, I would not. I would put it on top of the proposal because, as I said, one thing is the MFF. We need to invest and to finance our policies, and the other thing is the reimbursement of EU costs. And I will leave, let's say, the job to the Council if they want to cut, to decide where to cut, which is something very popular. So if I was the Commission, but of course I don't know, I don't have any insider information. The other question we used to look at is the composition, the overall composition of the MFF. Normally the Commission also proposed some reallocation between expenditures. I think this time will be a bit more difficult to do this exercise because if there are mergings and changes in the programs, well, it's much more difficult to see if we have increase or decrease in one specific program. Besides, the question is, do we have to compare to the MFF or do we have to compare to the package, the MFF plus NGO? For instance, if you look at heading 1 today, it represents 12.4% of the total MFF, but if you add up the NGO, it represents 7.9%. So do we have to see the relative weight of sectors in the overall package, or do we have to compare to the relative weight of sectors in the MFF? So that will be one question to to answer for researchers. But what can we expect in terms of reallocations? I think there is something that is very clear, that there will be a big increase in defense and security. Something that is less clear is competitiveness. We know that is a priority, but to which extent this will be translated in an increase in some sectors, I'm not sure. If increase is increase in the competitiveness fund or the first pillar, again, it's not clear. And if we look at what happened in the midterm review, the only clear increase in terms of fresh money was defense. So though I see a clear consensus and increasing budget on that, in other areas it's less clear. If we go to the pillars, the different pillars, there are different open questions, of course, and I think everybody will look at each of the pillars trying to resolve these questions. On the competitiveness pillar, well, we had discussion on that in another event, but maybe the big question is how much means do we put on that? I mean, and if we don't put, I think it's realistic to expect that it will not be a very big competitiveness fund. Because we have to be realistic, and then if this is not the case, how to cover where to find the money, the remaining need of money, which type of fiscal incentives there will be proposed to encourage member states to reinforce this part of the budget or to repurpose cohesion funds. I mean, I think there should be something about how to reinforce the competitiveness fund if it is small. Then on the national and regional partnerships for investments and reforms, I think everybody knows it, that there is much attention of these questions of governance. How much performance-oriented will we? How reform conditionality will be included. We can have a discussion, but I think it's better if we have some questions on that. Personally, I think there are some legitimate concerns that have been raised on mimicking what we have done with the RRF, so there is much more scope for improvement. We also feel that the Commission likes the model, so let's see what they propose. But maybe let me raise something, because it's something that is not very much a lot said on this type of debates. I think the questions of governance are important, but sometimes I think we are forgetting about the other open questions as regards cohesion policy. And 1 or 2 years ago, I don't remember the date, there was this famous report of the high-level group on the future of EU cohesion, which put important questions about what are the big challenges in terms of cohesion in the continent. And there were some challenges that do not correspond to the current cohesion policy. They were talking about problems of internal concentration within member states. They were talking about development track regions. So I would really like to see the reflection of that also in the new EU cohesion policy, and no longer business as usual. So my fear is that we talk a lot about reforming the governance, but no one is talking about the objectives of the policy and the allocation criteria of the policy. So I would like also to see changes there or proposals. I will not enter into the external pillar a lot. I'm not an expert on external policy. Maybe since we work on enlargement, also the big question is what the Commission will propose in support of Ukraine, knowing the huge uncertainty that lies there, and also in support of the other candidate countries. On other horizontal issues, well, there are many things to say. Mentioning the paper you mentioned, of course, flexibility. We need a much more flexible budget, but I will not enter into the detail on how to do it. Rule of law, the same. And maybe a final point on resources. I mean, I would say, I think it's a good idea to have new resources, but I would not waste too much political capital on this. Maybe I have become pessimistic over time because this debate we have having, not only because it's very difficult, but also because my fear is to end with a small budget with new resources. I mean, this is also a possible scenario. And again, I mentioned the position paper of the Germans. The Germans are open now to resources, but they keep on saying 1% of GDP as a budget. So why they are open? They want to increase the national contribution. So from an EU level perspective, what do we gain with that? So do not think that or avoid the false impression that if we create new resources, automatically that means bigger budget, because that's not true. I mean, the size of the budget is fixed separately to the way of financing the budget. So we might end up in this scenario in which we have new resources, but we have the same amount of EU budget. And I stop here.
No, thanks a lot. And we didn't invite you to get any leaks from the Commission, but also to get some independent thinking and independent question, also questioning the Commission, but also Parliament, to get a good debate going. And that's exactly what you did. Thank you very much for that. And yeah, mentioning all the different publications, most of you have also seen our little table at the entrance with a lot of different publications. So also if you haven't yet taken some of the publications, also feel free to take some on the way out to get informed. And also for those online and for those who don't want to carry the paper, you'll also find all our publications online on the EP Think Tank website. Now, one point that has been brought up was the national plans, or now they are called national and regional partnerships. Parliament has been rather skeptical about it, also in its report for reasons of budgetary control and parliamentary oversight and control. On the other hand, we have adopted as Parliament an implementation report on the RF, which was rather positive and also supported and even organized by you. And so my question is, what are maybe the good points of the RF that can be taken over to the new MFF, or what are the risks and where do we have to, we as Parliament, pay attention where we think this is dangerous and endangers parliamentary oversight and a good management of the funds? If you could say a bit on that, first Siegfried.
Yeah. Thank you very much. So look, what did we do with the Recovery Resilience Facility? That was not the ordinary budget of the European Union. That was a fund that we created when the pandemic came. And as you know, in the past, at least ever since the economic and financial crisis, 2008, 10, 11, 12, there were two schools of thought. One school of thought who said, we need Eurobonds, joint borrowing, common debt, so that, we help each other. Another school of thought which said, look, the EU treaties are very clear, everybody needs to take care of their own debt, no joint borrowing, everybody is responsible for keeping their own house in order. These two schools of thought came for the first time together at the beginning of the pandemic when we said there's a big crisis affecting, particularly in the beginning, some member states more. The Union needs to stay united. Solidarity is important. Let's borrow together to create a fund which is exceptional because we have an exceptional crisis. It is a one-off instrument, limited in time. It ends after some years, not becoming permanent, not forever, so limited in time, very precise in scope on what projects you can fund, and on the basis of a strict principle of conditionality. You receive money for investments, but in parallel you have to implement reforms to make sure that you improve your situation, that your economy is more resilient, that your social systems are stronger, that your public administration is better, healthcare increases capacity, education becomes more digital, so that when the next crisis hits, because the next crisis will come, we're more resilient. And now we're coming, towards the end of this instrument. We have, as Tim said, adopted with a large majority an implementation report, drawing many good conclusions on the Recovery Resilience Facility, but some things, obviously, we would have done differently with the knowledge of today. And the things which were not perfect there were the following. So basically, each member state had to put together a national plan to tell the Commission how they are going to implement the money allocated to them for the Commission to adopt. We told member states, do some cross-border projects, do international projects as well. They've done almost none. So each government only thought nationally, only national projects, no cross-border projects, no large transnational infrastructure projects which would benefit more than one member state. This is one lesson to be learned. Member states don't think European. Second lesson is we told them, do your national plans and implement them together with the regions. Did they do it? They did some consultations, very formalistic, some more, some less. Some took regions a bit on board, some less, some not at all. So not European and not with the proper involvement of the regions. Overall, on average, as I said, there are some good practices, good examples as well. So what I want to say is the philosophy of the Recovery Resilience Facility cannot be applied one-on-one to the EU budget, because that was not a budget, it was a top-up, it was an additional budget where from the beginning we said we make that exception, we borrow together, but we only do this under strict conditionality. While for the traditional budget, of course, also as per the EU treaty, the Union has an obligation to care for the lesser developed regions in an unconditioned manner. So this is why the principles of the budget, unity, solidarity, have to be preserved. The Recovery Resilience Facility, as I said, through that conditionality, it incentivized reforms, which for sure otherwise some reforms would not have been done. But we also see that the link between those reforms and investments was not clear. Basically, the governments have to implement certain milestones and targets linked to reforms, like you do a pension reform, you do a taxation reform, then you receive money. If you don't do that reform, money is being frozen, and, for example, you cannot complete the building of a highway because you didn't do a pension reform. So things were very macroeconomic. For the EU budget, we cannot accept that. We cannot have farmers not receiving their money because government isn't doing a pension reform. So this is why we do not necessarily think that reforms are a bad thing. I also think that reforms are a good thing. They are much needed. This is why we do not reject, introducing the concept of reforms into the budget, but it has to be proportionate and the link has to be clear and within the same policy area. And transparency, and of course, Carla also works on budgetary control much more than me. Transparency will be very important. So we need to know what we're paying for. With that model, with the Recovery Resilience Facility, you pay when reforms are done, but we need to know exactly which are the final beneficiaries, which projects you fund, which is known in the EU budget, and we think that principle should be preserved also in the future.
Thank you very much for that explanation. Carla, something to add on this issue, or no?
I think it's important to see.
Okay. Would you like to come in on this? Yes.
Yeah, maybe, yeah. No. I mean, I agree. There are a lot of things to improve from the RF model. I totally agree with the lack of visibility. When you ask citizens, they don't really know how to judge. For instance, the National Recovery and Reform Plan, whether we are doing well or not doing well as a country, it's very difficult. Why? Because we mix up a lot of different milestones and investments and reforms in one single payment. Sometimes people do not know why this payment is blocked. Also, the calendar of payments is very different from one country to the other, and it's not always linked to the implementation on the ground. So some countries receive a lot of funds, but they were not so advanced because the calendar was negotiated bilaterally according also to the needs of each member state. So in this sense, there are many things that were done not well, wrong, because of the speed. And I think the same for the definition. I think the Court of Auditors has done very, very good points, actually. The definition of milestones and targets, the harmonization, etc. Then maybe two other general points on the RF model. I think when it was created, there was a promise of agility, a promise of simplification. Part of the narrative of the Commission was saying, well, we will use performance-based, it will be easier, it will be simpler. And now we realize it's not, actually. It is complex. It is complex because you need the collection of data to be able, you need member states to have a good system to collect all data, to be able to report on outcomes and outputs and outcomes. So I think it makes sense if you have to do something else to simplify things, but you have to do something else in terms of simplified cost options, other things, to bring the simplification on the ground. Otherwise, it becomes very, very, very complex. And another, I would say, implicit promise was we trust the national control systems. I mean, all the RF regime builds on this trust of the national control systems. We're not going to track the use of all euros because first of all, we will look at the national control systems, we will put milestones, control milestones, and once we are sure that they work, then, of course, it's up to them to look at to preserve, to protect the EU financial interests, as we say. Well, again, I mean, it has not worked in all member states as well. And I think also we have maybe to differentiate or to create some system by which this trust has to be earned, let's say. No? Not for all countries, maybe it's so easy to apply this. And I'm linking this to the study we did on enlargement, because now in enlargement we are using the same type of model with the facilities. So also indirectly we are trusting the control systems, and there we are talking about member states which have much weaker administrations even than countries that have weaker administrations. So I think we have to find the balance, but these two promises are not totally fulfilled. I'm not saying it's bad, but we have to be more skeptical and maybe to differentiate maybe where it makes sense to do it and how to deliver on simplification, which has not been really delivered.
Now I will speak in Portuguese. It's a beautiful language, no?
It is, yes. I'm getting used to it.
It's too easy for me. So about the...
Well, concerning the RRF, I think it's important to mention certain other issues. The Commission on Financial Control has been discussing together with the budget, and my colleague Siegfried is a rapporteur concerning what has been not just concerning flexibility, but the issues concerning the access. The low involvement from the European Parliament, it was a measure that was very important, as Siegfried said. I had the privilege at the time to follow as president of, mayor of, or at least president of the metropolitan area of Lisbon. So I know what this measure meant in practice. And it's important for Portugal, and it's still important, not just Portugal, certainly for other member states. But it failed. It failed in terms of the experience that I have on the field, the link between, because this was a special program, because there was no time, because it's adapted on time, between the national and the local level. We don't have regions in Portugal, but the definition, establishing the targets and defining the priorities, I think we failed there because the involvement at the regional and local level are essential. And I always give an example that for us in the 27 member states is a great challenge, which is the housing issue. We would have had more success in implementing and implementing the Next Generation EU in all its measures in each of the member states if the link between the decision concerning housing had been taken at the local level. And I think we failed in terms of Next Generation EU. The measure is important. We will certainly give many steps ahead concerning housing at the European level. So it was essential, although it was difficult in this matter, and it would have been even more difficult if we didn't have the RRF as we had. But involving the Parliament, access for the biggest beneficiaries of the measures, and this is the control committee should have. Even last week we heard the new report about RRF, and we were able to ask these questions. In conclusion, the report of the Parliament is clear, defending the regional and local levels. We understand that in terms of cohesion, this is actually absolutely essential. Obviously, RRF had positive points. The Court of Auditors is clear about that and helps us in taking next decisions. But the next MFF cannot, in our view, at the Parliament, have the same base, the same architecture, the same bones as it had the RRF. It does not seem that with the present challenge that we face, which are totally different from we had when we started working on the present MFF, and we often say that the world geopolitical circumstance that we lived in October last, when we started in this dossier, is totally different of today's reality. So I think that it's still important. We have to look at the positive points of RRF, but not center the next MFF on the architecture of the RRF, because it does not seem to be the right path to follow for the European policies, because we need to converge afterwards and have to think about the implementation phase. Thank you.
Thank you. So I see that we also use our Portuguese interpreters, and the Portuguese colleagues here in the room were also smiling and happy that they could also listen directly to this beautiful language. So my next question would be on also some horizontal mainstreaming targets. So in the EU budget, we have targets such as for climate spending, we have targets for biodiversity spending, but we also have gender mainstreaming without any specific targets, but we are tracking it. Now we heard that for the next MFF, there will be a bit more of focus on security and defense, on competitiveness, but isn't there like maybe a slight clash coming up? Because if you build tanks, or if you also look, I think this morning I was attended the workshop on gender mainstreaming. It said that was it more than 80 or more than 90% of the people working in the sector of security defense were men. And so if you spend more on this, maybe it's negative for the gender mainstreaming target. So how do we solve that? Will there be now also a mainstreaming target for competitiveness and preparedness on top, which balances the other targets? Or will all targets be made a bit softer to keep some more flexibility in the budget? Where are we going on these horizontal targets? Siegfried,
look, spending on security defense is good for men and good for women, good for young and old in rural, urban areas, And by the way, the north and the south, the east and the west, we're all together in this, right? I mean, in Spain, you're just a couple of minutes further away from a Russian rocket than you are in Poland. It's not so much farther away or whatever. Yes. No, but seriously now. So we are, and I mean, we are spending now about 30% of everything of what the Union's spending these 7 years on the transition to the green economy. Important. Energy efficiency, new technologies, and so on. But the more this is based on research innovation, by the way, the better, I think. We should track what happens with EU money. Of course, gender balance is one of our objectives, but we have to find a balance in the sense that we have to follow on these objectives. We have also clear new priorities. Tim was mentioning them. We were, Carla and myself, talking about it before: security, defense, competitiveness. So we have to strike a balance, in simple words. I mean, we have to track, but sometimes, setting an objective and that allowing a bit also for the beneficiaries, for the regions, for the private sector to follow within that framework their priorities, to allocate money where they think is needed, is a bit wiser than, trying for us to over-regulate everything in detail. Then it just becomes slower, more bureaucratic, discourages beneficiaries, big burden for NGOs, for small local entities, for young entrepreneurs. The more conditions, the more reporting obligations, the worse, particularly for small beneficiaries, farmers, young farmers. So we need to strike a balance. We need to make sure that we meet our objectives, but that we don't overburden the beneficiaries, and that we also do not create artificial limitations, which then make, a serious implementation of the budget very, very difficult, Very often beneficiaries, private sector can regulate many things by themselves. If you tell a laptop producer, recycle 95% of your laptop, full stop, set a high target, but they would know better how to recycle it. If you tell them, recycle 95% of your laptop and do it in this and this and this way, maybe they know better than we know here in Brussels. Maybe they can do it in an optimal or more efficient way. So this is why I think we need to strike a balance.
What's the view of the S&D group?
It can seem strange, but it's maybe the same. No, really, this morning we have... Esta manhã nós tivemos a oportunidade numa audição conjunta.
This morning there was a joint meeting between the committees and we discussed the prevailing challenges in terms of gender equality. In our draft report, we think that gender equality should continue to be an objective, but we should try to strike a balance, because it's difficult to collect data, to process the data, to understand how a certain program or fund is contributing more to gender equality. In any case, we are pleased to perceive that the European Commission is also working on these matters within the scope of the next MFF, so that they can find new approaches to address these topics. This is a prevailing challenge, but this is only normal. I mean, this is the story of our life. When we work on public institutions, when we are public officials, it's very difficult to collect the data, process the data, and then actually understand the tangible outcome of the use of the public funds. And this is something which is valid across all levels: European, national, regional, and local. During different forums, all the players say that it's difficult to collect, compile, and process the data, because each country, each entity has their own methodology. But at the end of the day, we need to have more reliable and detailed information, which quite often is not possible. But regarding the specific themes, I think that the pro-European countries at the European Parliament have the same opinion. That is why they voted positively on this report, and they have been working on the proposal of the EP over the past months. But there are ongoing discussions, of course. Not negotiations, I would say, but meetings with the Commission. This will be discussed within the upcoming meetings with the Commission.
Your view on the horizontal mainstreaming targets, and I mean, you argued also for more flexibility. At the same time, if you introduce additional mainstreaming targets, you might end up with a lot of less flexibility and more bureaucracy. And it's not only the beneficiaries, but also in the Commission and DG Budget, there are a lot of people calculating everything and thinking about all the methodology. On the other hand,
maybe I will be a bit provocative, but I'm not a fan of mainstreaming, I must admit. I'm not a fan of mainstreaming because I think it's taking the jargon of performance-oriented, it's not performance-oriented. It's just an objective in terms of input. We are saying we want 30% spending that or 40% spending that, but it's just an aggregate objective in terms of input, but does not allow the Union to have a bit of directionality. Spend for what exactly? I mean, if the objective is decarbonization, and if we want to use the EU budget in a smart way and focus on EU public goods added value projects, maybe it's better to single out the type of projects that makes more sense to spend at the EU level to reach decarbonization. And it's not the same putting EU funds to finance a bike path in a local city that putting EU funds to finance cross-border energy grids. It makes much more sense to decarbonize, to put it in a cross-border energy grids. And mainstreaming does not allow you to do it. It's just a matter of aggregation. I mean, it's good, it's better than nothing, but I think we have to surpass this way of reaching horizontal EU goals. We have to have something a bit more directional in which we decide the way of with some output and outcome objectives and track to which extent what we are financing contribute to reaching these objectives. And in the end, we see it with mainstreaming. We end up with endless discussion about methodology, but we don't really know to which extent this has helped us to reach the final goal, that is decarbonization. To which extent all the funds that we have spent in this 30% climate mainstreaming has been well spent in the terms of EU added value. We don't have this information with mainstreaming.
Okay, thank you very much. I think these were quite interesting aspects on this topic. Now I would like to invite the participants here to ask questions. I know the first one is always the most difficult one, but there's already a volunteer. Please briefly say your name and for whom you work or who you represent here.
Sure. So my name is Dag Sorander. I'm a former administrator in the Foreign Affairs Committee, where I worked on budget issues, among other things. I've also been in the policy department. And discussions on budget often becomes quite technical, but the main theme of this MFF is utterly political. It's security. And what I'd like to discuss a little is the conception of security. Rearm Europe plan we have. But even military planners and analysts recognize that arms only go so far when it comes to providing security. Defense capacity also depends on other things, and not only civil defense, resilience against cybersecurity, and so on. It's wider than that. It depends on the population's receptiveness to foreign propaganda, for example. It depends on the population's loyalty with the systems they live under. When we see today how how trust in these systems and in governments are eroding very quickly, that's the way to gain elections today, to appeal to that erosion of trust. So security is also a matter of social cohesion. And it's not a coincidence that after the communist revolutions, after the Second World War...
Maybe focus on your question, please.
Yes, I'm coming to it. But I imagine that this is sufficiently interesting to give me one more minute or two. It's not a coincidence that welfare states appeared, the European social model, after the Second World War, because it was a part of raising defenses against an expanding Soviet empire. Now, I wonder, to cut it a bit short, where in your analysis is this dimension, that security is more than arms. It's also social security. It's also climate security. Where does that come in? How can we see it in the proposal that you will make?
Do you want to collect or do you want to reply?
Yeah, let's collect a bit, yeah, of course.
Okay, good. So that was more a question on preparedness. Then, was there some arms going up? Alessandro?
Thank you, Tim, and thanks to all the panelists for the insightful discussion. My name is Alessandro D'Alfonso. I'm the head of the Next Generation EU Monitoring Service at EPRS. So my question is also related to Next Generation EU, because when we speak of the borrowing for Next Generation EU, of course we rightfully think always of how we will repay this. At the same time, the Draghi report also suggested rolling over part of the debt to increase the investment capacity of the EU in the future. And a number of analyses highlight as well that having EU safe assets would also help the development of capital markets in the European Union. So in your resolution on the future MFF, you have pointed out that borrowing should be considered as a possible source of funding. In which ways would you see the role of borrowing also for financing of future EU policies? Thank you.
Thank you, Alessandro. There, please.
Yeah, thank you, moderator, and to the panelists for the very interesting discussion. So in the first part, we have covered social cohesion, competitiveness, and security and defense that are headings of the budget. I would like to ask the panelists to also expand a little bit on the external action and international partnerships heading, which going forward and taking into account the strategic priorities of the EU, it's an important tool or an important piece to leverage some of those strategic priorities. So if they can speak about their expectations for that part of the budget. Thank you. I'm sorry, I'm Nerea Cravioto. I'm Senior Policy Analyst at ODI Europe, a think tank based in Brussels.
Thank you. I think that's maybe good to keep it at 3 and then give you the chance to reply. Carla, do you want to start?
Okay.
Or Siegfried?
So, look, firstly, on security, defense, and so on. I mean, I think it's clear to all of us that what you now see last when we are under attack is the military equipment. There's many stages before. This has changed in recent years. So preparing, protecting citizens now, of course, means investing in defense to deter, to prevent any aggression, to be possible to be able to respond. There's many other things that we have to do. I mean, in terms of cybersecurity, in terms of cybersecurity, in terms of protecting our borders, in terms of responding to cyber threats. It's very often electoral interference. It's disinformation, propaganda, protecting the media landscape, online, offline, traditional media. It's dual-use infrastructure. It's military mobility. And of course, when we're moving closer to defense, investing in a competitive defense industry, research, innovate together in the area of defense at European level, enable purchases in high quantities at a low unit price, making equipment available, same types of equipment available to all member states here, with also improving the interoperability. I think, indeed, the concept is broad, protecting the rule of law, protecting our institutions, because this is, what autocracies around the world use, challenge to weaken our way of life and to reduce the attractiveness for our European model, so that the discrepancy between our model and their model, which is based on poverty, violence, hate, division, doesn't become so obvious. Now, on the questions linked to recovery resilience facility and rolling over of debt. Look, we have to pay back the debt that we made for Next Generation EU. Postponing it, paying it back later, will be cheaper in the short term but more expensive in the long term. It means that as of 2028, we do not pay back interest and principal, we pay back only interest, but it means that in the long term, we have to pay back interest again and still the principal. So this is why we're skeptical about the rolling over of debt. As I said, either member states paying more, or we cut the budget, or we introduce own resources. We have a clear preference. We can't exclude that, at the very end, the final solution might be a bit of a mix of these, but for sure we cannot roll over debt without having own resources, in the sense that member states, they also do not pay for all the debt that they made immediately. They also roll over debt, but they have revenues, stable revenues. So the union cannot roll over debt without having own resources to also convince the financial markets that we're going to pay back the debt from this, and so that we make sure that an eventual cost of the rolling over of debt doesn't affect the EU budget even more in the future, because now, as I said, if we are to pay back Next Generation EU from the EU budget, pay it back as it's foreseen, it costs us 25 billion euros, 15% of the budget as of 2028. So we have to make sure that if we roll it over, we don't pay the interest now, and then we pay back the interest and the principal from the EU budget in the future. So I would strictly say no to rolling over of debt unless own resources are introduced. On borrowing, on joint borrowing. Look, you have a responsible social democrat here, you have a responsible centre-right Christian democrat here. We agree on the following, and it's part of our report. Obviously, we did joint borrowing once at the beginning of the pandemic for loans and for grants with Next Generation EU. We did it once, saying it's exceptional, saying, as I said, strict conditionality, limited in time, precise in scope. We now see also the negative consequence of doing it, that, you have to pay it back. And without own resources, you risk cutting your own budget, weakening your greening, your digital priorities, your competitiveness, your farming, your cohesion, everything. So making debt is a difficult decision, but it has negative consequences, particularly in times of high interest rates. This is why, as it was done once, we see the negative consequences, we see the problems, we see the benefits that it brought, we see the problems that it creates now for the repayment, and I think there will be more talk about this. And we saw that joint borrowing was done again by the Commission for defense now, the so-called SAFE program, but they borrow, make money available for member states, but only for loans. So here there is not a big problem with the repayment because member states paid back. What I want to say is, as joint borrowing was done, once in a more generous way also for grants for Next Generation EU, once only for loans, we cannot exclude that, ever be done again. I mean, we wouldn't be serious to say no to joint borrowing, 2 weeks after the European Commission proposed it for the SAFE program. This is why you see an opening in our report, with us being aware of the limitation, of the positive effects, of the negative effects. But if you ask me personally, I think we can't borrow jointly now unless we pay Next Generation EU for more grants. We simply don't have the fiscal space, so that's a bit where we are. But for sure, the joint borrowing should remain an exception, not a rule. Last point on external action. Look, I think we should focus on countries in our immediate neighborhood. With the support, that's where the biggest benefits, the biggest risks for us lie. That's where there is the biggest contribution for our security if we, export security, bring stability to those countries. I think we shouldn't, we should make money available for the candidate countries as pre-accession funds, but as we do not know when the Union will enlarge, how our policies will look like then, how developed the candidate countries will be, so to how much money they will be entitled, but also what eventual exceptions or longer transition periods we negotiate as part of their accession treaties. So we do not know now how much enlargement would cost, also because, as I said, we don't know when it will happen. This is why we advocate for a so-called revision clause for the case of an enlargement. Make pre-accession funds available for member states now, but don't make money available now for them as new EU member states because we don't know when they would join, under what conditions, and so the debate would just be an abstract one, and Vladimir Putin would just love us discussing, about the eventual high costs of Ukraine joining, so that, half of Europe fears they have to pay in more into the EU budget. Net contributing countries and the net recipient countries more in the eastern part of the continent would fear that, hey, my cohesion funds are not coming to me to Poland anymore, but they're going to Ukraine. I think Putin would love nothing more than us being divided and thinking that, we will all lose on the budget just for Ukraine, for example, to win. I think we shouldn't play into their hands. We shouldn't go into this discussion, this debate. It's for later. So this is why we say, if ever there will be an enlargement in the next 7 years, we will revise the budget then and deal with it then. We should only answer the questions which we have to answer now and which we can answer now.
Carla?
Just more one, só mais uma ou duas questões, o Siegfried.
Just a couple of additional remarks. Regarding your first question/comment on defense, I think that's actually one of our key challenges. How can we explain Europeans that defense is not just about arms, it's about AI, it's about everything that you said. A couple of months ago, there was the blackout in Spain and in Portugal. I mean, security and defense is investing on AI, investing on cybersecurity, and it's all about investing in essential services, including high quality energy and water grids, so that the citizens enjoy a peaceful life and benefit from these services. So for us, security is not just about rearm Europe. It's much more than that. And this is the message that the European Parliament has been trying to convey. When we mention security in our proposal. It's not just about procuring weapons. The Parliament is not didn't negotiated with the Commission that the Parliament will buy arms. This is just one of the stages of the process. There are many more other things that concur for a stronger defense and security at the EU. Regarding the joint borrowing, Siegfried already answered correctly, but this was a topic that we discussed a lot within the pro-European countries. We pointed out this in the report because the context today is very different from the context when the last MFF was prepared. And actually, the reality changed significantly over the last couple of months. It's important to understand that the world changes every single day, every single second. And regarding the joint borrowing, we are not closing doors. We don't want to close any doors. We are not saying that we should resort to joint borrowing at all costs. No. We just keep the door open. This is a document for 2028, and we are still in 2025. We just need to make sure that in this text it is provided for, that we have capacity to be flexible. So when we point out joint borrowing is not just for defense. It might be for other areas that down the road might be extremely important. Because if you don't think about this in advance, it's rather difficult down the line to do it. We don't know what will be the configuration of the European Parliament over the next year. So based on the lessons learned, we need to be prepared to address what we might be facing down the road, so that we are not faced with the same situation that we were faced with when COVID emerged. Siegfried already answered, but regarding external action, I mean, this is a dear topic to the European Parliament. Today, important meetings are taking place in the Development Committee regarding external action. As we all know the position of the current leadership of the US regarding support to third countries and to the USAID. The European Parliament don't think that this topic should be neglected. It is included in our proposal, and it is a dimension that should be focus of the European Union. Because external action is yet another means for the European Union to strengthen itself and to reaffirm itself in the global context. It's through the external action that the European Union can position itself vis-à-vis the US and China. So external aid and external action at large continue to be key pillars of the work of the European Union. This is the opinion of the European Parliament as well. Thank you.
On security and defense preparedness?
Well, maybe just 2 or 3 points on security and defense. On military and defense part, I think we have a huge communication problem with the citizens, and we have to be better to explain. Again, I come back to the question we were saying before, that if we talk only in terms of inputs, we have to increase more in defense. In defense, people do not understand exactly for what. So I'm not an expert in defense, but I expect from experts that explain exactly what are the problems we have in terms of capabilities and what we have to fill with the EU money, because otherwise it's very difficult to pass. I mean, I come from Spain, and you know in Spanish public opinion how difficult it is to pass the message that we need to put EU funds on military spending. So we have to explain very clearly for which projects, which common projects we are going to build, or for helping the member states to fill which capabilities they don't have. Otherwise, it's very difficult to pass the message. And on preparedness in general, one specific topic we have not mentioned, but I think it's super important, is climate adaptation and response to climate catastrophes. We do not know whether we will have more geopolitical crises, more health crises, but we do know that we will have more climate crisis because we are the most fastest warming continent in the world. So there will be more and more severe climate crisis. So I think there is a need to reflect also how to use the EU budget to cover this crisis and also to prepare and to reduce the risk of damages following this crisis.
Thank you. Both of the members have their next meeting and have to still walk over. Still, one final question to both of you. Eulalia at the beginning mentioned that the European Parliament always focuses a lot on new own resources, but maybe not so much on more money, even though that was also mentioned. So maybe Siegfried, you, more money or higher budget or more own resources? What do you choose? Or do you think it's unrealistic and if we can't get a higher budget without higher own resources?
Look, I think the hypothesis from which Eulalia started is correct in saying if you just focus on demanding own resources, maybe you would get it in negotiations with Council and Commission, but you don't get anything else, and don't do that because you would be wrong. I think she's right. But what she also said in the end is that own resources would decrease the national contribution of member states. And if we start the final negotiations with them from a decreased national contribution for them, I think it's a bit more likely that we obtain, in the end, a slightly higher contribution from them if we also help them out through own resources. They don't like them because they they decide on them. Every own resource needs the unanimous agreement of member states and the ratification in all national parliaments. So it's not some bad MEPs in Brussels who can introduce own resources. So it will have to be something very broadly accepted politically in Europe by the societies and so on. So the threshold is high, so I'm not worried that, we do nasty things, we shoot above the target. But what I want to say is, if we do own resources, I think the space of maneuver for governments is also a bit higher to increase their contributions a bit. So I think her point is valid, but I think own resources might allow us, enable, a final agreement at the end of the day.
Carla.
Muito obrigada. Bom, relativamente a...
Thank you very much. The question of new own resources is not a new question that has been debated in this parliament on this mandate. It's from the past already. In my view, it's inevitable. I understand what Eulalia said so, and rightly so, as she's very experienced because she follows these discussions. We cannot run away from discussion. This discussion will have to take place for the good of the EU. The elephant is in the middle of the room, and this is an opportunity to get into it. We know that the international context is particularly difficult, and it's more difficult today than it was in 20 or 21, even to discuss these matters. But we cannot give up when we are preparing the next MFF. This is not a decision for tomorrow. Of course, we're not going to close MFF negotiations tomorrow. So I think it's absolutely necessary to base ourselves that we need to approach this question, own self-resources, and we cannot give up in trying to find a new path. Because if it's not now, it will be in 2 or 3 years. It's inevitable. In order to take all the challenges that the EU faces, and we want the EU to be strong, consolidate, and being seen, of course, as an important actor in the world sphere.
Carla, thank you very much. Siegfried, thank you very much. Eulalia, I think we've all gained some additional knowledge and insight on where we will go as the EU and what is necessary to finance the future long-term budget. thanks a lot. And this is just the beginning of the debate. I think there are still a lot of more months to come where we will further debate this subject. And please stay with us, with EPRS. We will publish more publications and we will also have more events. And see you soon again. Have a nice afternoon.
Thank you.